Hello, and welcome to another Woolfolk workshop. I am Gary Woolfolk, your presenter. I am the author of the book Before the Application, and I coming to you today to address a topic that has recently come up, whereas the College Board announced changes for the SAT going forward. So let's go ahead and dive into this. Okay. So the College Board made a couple of announcements. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what those announcements are. Then we will talk about what do they actually mean? How does it affect current high school students? Then I'm going to just touch a little bit on the future of the ACT and SAT. And then if we have any questions that come up in the comments, then I will try to answer some of those. So I will go ahead and get started here. So here are the two announcements that were made by the College Board regarding SAT. The first is we are no longer offering SAT subject test in the US. And one of the explanations that is provided on their website is that they're reducing the demands on students. They feel that with the AP exams and the widespread availability, there's no longer a need for the subject test. And then they also announced that they will be discontinuing the optional SAT essay after June of this year. And they have stated on their website that they were adapting to respond to the changing needs of students and colleges and a couple other statements. Now, I have my personal opinions about why these stopped, but that's not really important at this time because they will no longer be available. But what is important to do is to make sure you understand exactly what these changes mean. Because I've come to find out in talking to a few people that they don't understand what an SAT subject test is to be able to relate that to the SAT that is for admissions to colleges, the standard test. So here we go. The SAT subject test is basically a mechanism that the SAT had in place, the College Board had in place to test on specific subjects. So they have a variety of subjects, a total of, the last I checked, there were 20, and they were in 5 different subject areas. And there were various schools that would ask students to take these specific tests, and then the student could decide, do I want to take English or history or math? And if you decided to do a science, you could take maybe the chemistry or the biology or the physics. And so there were different colleges that would require this to try to assess your ability in these subject areas. But here's the deal. There were only about 25 colleges that actually require or strongly recommended that students take the subject test. And as you could guess, these are more of your more elite schools in the country, your Ivy League schools and the other schools that are similar to Ivy Leagues. They would require students to take typically 2, maybe 3 of these subject tests, and they would give the students an options of which ones to take. So if we think about the fact that only 1% of all college students attend an Ivy League school, you can really see that it doesn't affect a lot of students. But it is important to understand that this does not in any way affect the normal, typical SAT test that a student would take for entrance into a college that requires an SAT. So I want to make sure people understand that this is a totally different set of tests that will not affect most students. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the SAT optional essay. So with the standard SAT that is given that most people need to take to get into college, they offered an option to take the SAT with an essay. And this is typically a 50-minute essay that you usually are given a prompt and you need to write to the prompt. And when it comes to your total score that is out of 1,600, that comes from the regular math and English writing sections. That score is never affected by the SATs, the essay portion of the test. That is always scored separately, and then both scores would then be sent to schools. Now, there were probably a little over 125 colleges that would require or strongly recommend the essay, and I do apologize for my typo there, for the essay portion of the test. So again, we're talking, less than probably 3%, maybe 4% of colleges where this even mattered in the first place. So again, the essay is no longer going to be offered. And part of the application anyway, you typically have a primary essay that you need to fill out. And many colleges already ask for additional essays that would typically want this essay. So I think the only thing you could expect to see is maybe a few more colleges in the application process may ask for additional essays. So again, for most people, this really didn't come into play anyway. So not a major change to really consider. So that's what I talked about here, the impact of the change. The SAT subject test, because only 1% of people actually go to the schools that it affects, maybe 2% were applying to these schools. So it's not going to affect most people applying to colleges. And it definitely removes a burden for those people who are attempting to gain interest into one of these elite schools. And again, the optional essay does not affect a lot of people, and your college application already has a lot of essays for them to be able to gauge your writing ability. All right, so with that being said, I kind of then want to talk about just the ACT and the SAT overall, because we're kind of in some interesting times and everyone is keeping an eye on what's going to take place with the SAT and the ACT. All right, so what do we know for 2021? There are a lot of colleges that are no longer requiring that you submit an SAT or ACT score for entrance. And that is because there are many locations where these tests that are being offered are being canceled because of COVID. So I don't think that all colleges, this hasn't taken place. So you definitely need to research. If you're in the senior class and you haven't taken it yet, you need to research and find out, will your college be requiring it? But most colleges are not. And, so again, do your research on that. But the question is, what do we know beyond 2021? So for the current junior class that will start applying in the fall, yes, there are some colleges that are starting to say they're going to make it optional. Here's my recommendation for you. Even if the SAT or ACT is going to be optional, if you have the opportunity to take the test, I highly recommend that you do. And the main reason for this is if you just so happen to do well on that test, it will be in your favor to be able to submit a good score along with your application. But if it's optional and you don't have a score that you feel will help you stand out in a particular school, simply don't, submit it to that school. But it can give you an opportunity to enhance your overall application. There are many cases, though, that there are students that just won't be given that opportunity because so many test dates have been eliminated, it's going to be difficult for them to find a slot to take the test. But when we look for students beyond the current junior class, those who will be graduating beyond 2022, what is going to be happening with these standardized tests? Well, as you can imagine, we simply don't know. When we look in California, those schools are saying that at this point, they're going to begin phasing out the requirement for an ACT or an SAT test. A lot of colleges, as you can see, are making it a year-by-year decision, and they're really keeping a close eye because they're wanting this test to be submitted. If I'm an underclassman at this time, I am going to make sure that I am planning to do my very best on one of these tests, the ACT or the SAT, because I can't imagine that these tests are going to completely go away. The reason I say this is I believe that colleges must have a way to be able to truly assess the current ability of students across many different types of schools. So if you have a 4.0 and at various different schools, they don't fully always understand what that means because there's different manners in which schools are teaching things. There's different manners in which schools teach. There has to be a way for colleges to be able to understand with a standardized methodology, how one student compares to another. Again, no college simply uses this test for entrance into their school. However, they utilize this to get a feel for where you stand as a student. So I would not expect this test to go away. So therefore, I would make sure I spend the time preparing for it. And so when I make the statement, how to plan, and I'm not in this workshop going to be able to go through all the steps that it takes to do it. Again, I highly recommend, looking at my book before the application, because I really cover this in detail throughout the book. But I do want to say that this should never be a test that you wait until late in your junior year or your senior year to begin to prepare for. I highly recommend, if you're in high school, starting ninth grade, that's the time where you start preparing to take the test. There's a lot of different things that you can look at doing. Especially every student should really look at getting one of those SAT or ACT apps on their phone, and they usually have something like SAT question of the day, and spend 2 minutes each day going over an SAT question. And the ability to do this and just become so familiar with all the different type questions that you will see, that has a great value. Then there's taking practice tests. They're learning different tips and tricks for strategies on how to approach different parts of the test. But I just want to make sure people understand that SAT and ACT scores may not be the deciding factor for you to get into your target school, but many times those are going to be your ticket to gain you entrance into the pool that they will be selecting from. It can definitely help your situation out. So I just want to make sure that all students start as soon as possible and really start focusing in on how to do the best that you can possibly do on the SAT and ACT. So that basically covers for me what I wanted to talk about regarding these tests. All right, thank you for taking the time to look at it. Again, if anyone has any questions, please go to woolfolkworks.com to get in touch with me. You can reach out to me through social media, Woolfolk Works on Twitter and Gary R. Woolfolk on Facebook. Look forward to having more of these and sharing information.